Welcome everyone from Icon. Thank you so much, Arlene. I tell you what, these moments of being able to worship together, listen to music together, even though we're separated physically, have just been so important, so crucial for me. And as I hear from so many of you, I realize so important for you guys as well. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone that's doing so much to continue to connect, everything that you're doing, Arlene, to continue to lead us in worship, Amanda and Dino and Adam and Kelly and so many of the team that have done so much to ensure that we stay connected, on top of countless ones of you who've been emailing and reaching out to us. We've had people reach out from other countries that have recently connected to Icon, that have said, I want to get involved too. So we're excited to find more and more ways to connect with one another during this season and find ways, as things eventually get back to normal at some point, to continue to still find ways to connect like this for those that maybe are physically unable to come into church service, to come to a physical location, or just geographically have connected with this community in a way that they're looking for. We're going to be looking for ways to do that. And it's just been so incredible to continue to connect like this. And I appreciate these times together. I know for me, I'm kind of starting to find a little bit of a rhythm. I was talking this week with Kelly, and we were talking about some things that we wanted to start doing. And I feel like early on in this whole quarantine thing, I had very little willpower. It was enough just to try to keep going and make sure the kids are doing their online schooling, or make sure church things actually happen, make sure I get some sort of message recorded and sent out each week. Just those things were a struggle. And I'm starting to kind of find a little bit of a rhythm, starting to find some routines a little bit. And this week, for the most part, has been a really good week. Kelly's birthday was this week, so maybe in the comments, give her a shout out, tell her happy birthday. We had a great time, and that was a great way to celebrate as a family as we did that this week. But just in general, it was a pretty good week this week. Until actually last night, not last night as in Saturday, last night from recording this. I'm recording this Friday. Thursday night, Jonathan Norfie and I had this great idea. You see, we wanted to do something that would just bring some lightness to this world, and specifically to you, our church family. There's so much heaviness going on. There's so much weighing on all of us. We just wanted to do something that would bring a laugh. Jonathan and I have known each other for 20 plus years. And we have always, for those 20 years, enjoyed doing kind of stupid things together. And we thought, man, maybe we could do something that would bring a laugh. But then we also found a way that we could partner with a nonprofit. And we decided to do something that we would do a hot wings challenge. Jonathan notoriously in the past hadn't been able to handle hot foods, but has been doing a lot better, being married to a Hispanic woman and marrying into that family. He's getting more and more used to some hot foods, and thought he could hang, and we would do this hot wing challenge and buy 10 different wings, wing sauces that increasingly got hotter. And all proceeds, he would give people opportunity to give, and all proceeds would go to the Hays County Easter Impact Offering, which is a fund that 13 churches from across Hays County are partnering together to raise funds for. And we raised $40,000 for the Hays County Food Bank at a time that they needed it most and our community needed it most. And so it was great to give back to a great cause, but my week got significantly less good last night as we worked our way through this wing challenge. Really, the front end wasn't so bad. The tail end, things started getting a lot hotter. And then there was the last sauce. And it felt like it went from maybe a 6 or a 7 to a 12. I mean, it was awful. We were dying. In fact, I went ahead and put together a couple of clips. So why don't you go ahead? This is how last night went for Jonathan and I. Go ahead and check this out.
We've got our milk. We're talking about maybe some side action on who can not touch their milk or water the longest.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of people seem to think that this is just like a done deal that Dan's gonna win, but I don't.
Because it is.
I don't know that that's the case necessarily.
All right, let me re-aim this one just a tiny bit. Do you really, honestly, think you'll last long?
I do.
How was
good.
this one?
It was tasty. I'm not feeling anything at all.
All right,
Nothing. Not one thing.
how was that one?
Tasty.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm not feeling a thing.
Perfect.
It's not hot.
I'm fine.
It's not hot at all. It's fine. These aren't hot, dude, at all.
I was gonna say, you're starting to act a little different, man.
I-
How's the heat? How you doing?
It was good, dude. I'm fine.
This is number 4.
I'm fine.
And you done?
Yeah, I'm good, dude. These wings are not even that hot at all. Not even that hot at all.
How you doing?
Dude, I'm doing so good. I'm doing great, man. It's not even that spicy at all. Not that spicy at all. I mean, that's really easy. Actually, I would do this just
For fun?
for fun and I'm being hungry. Dude, I'm doing fine, guys. Like, I'm not
Really?
struggling at all.
Seems like you're
It
struggling.
seems
a
like
little
you're
bit.
struggling a lot.
I'm doing just fine.
Oh man, that one's gonna be really hot. We only got 3 left, and I'm not feeling a thing.
Okay.
Not feeling anything at all.
All right, cool.
It's just like another walk in the park, sit down, eat some wings with my bro. Dude, that one's hot.
Yeah. So that one has some heat to it. Little tingle. Little tingle.
Not too bad though. Dude, I'm not doing bad.
What? You're not?
I'm doing good. Oh gosh.
Oh, this is bad.
Oh man.
It's right in the back of your
Dude, I can feel it in my throat bad. Oh man.
You got the hiccups?
Ooh. I feel like I might throw up.
Milk's right there, dude.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna take it because it's barely affecting me. When you breathe, it hurts more.
Yep. Well, you gotta breathe in. Just don't breathe out.
Oh my gosh.
Eyes are just watering a little.
Not even that bad.
Nope.
Nope. Dude, you want to say truce and drink milk?
No, I'm good. You gonna take some of that home? That dab was, got something.
Yep, that was a stupid idea.
You can go ahead and grab that
Oh,
milk.
dang it. There we go, right. I get some.
Oh.
Oh, gosh.
Yes.
Oh, God. Oh. Oh, God. Oh,
You guys want to go see Jonathan right now? Oh. I feel like I could vomit. Are you drinking? He's okay. Kelly started me to tell me to turn it off.
Christina literally just said, quit putting that towel on your face.
Your wife is smarter.
Oh, gosh. My eyes.
Bye, everybody. We're gonna go take care of Jonathan.
Oh, I can't open my eyes.
Don't forget to donate.
Jonathan and I were in so much pain, specifically, as you noticed, Jonathan, because he kept using this napkin to wipe his mouth, and then at the end, used that same napkin to wipe his eyes. And listen, maybe I should be a better human and not laugh at my friend when he's in genuine pain, but that was freaking hilarious. So Jonathan has fully recovered, don't worry. Although we are still experiencing some of the side effects of last night, if that makes sense. Both of us woke up last night with a really bad stomach ache. I took some Tums, went back to bed. Jonathan said he woke up at 1 a.m. with the worst stomach ache he's ever had in his life, vomited twice, and drank a bunch of Pepto and then also felt the pain well on the other end of things. So I've yet to experience that, but little TMI, but that's where my week went really downhill and got real rough. But you know what? It was a fun time. I hope you guys were able to enjoy it. I believe it's still on our Facebook page and Instagram live story. So if you didn't see it, you can jump on and check that out. And you can still give to the Easter Impact Fund if you'd like to. But that was kind of a fun time for us. As strange as that may sound. And I just feel like we need some lightness in this season where everything just feels so heavy, right? There's just so many things that the heaviness of this situation, of our circumstances, is just at times overwhelming. There's been times that I've just struggled getting things done that usually I would have no problem getting done. And as I thought about this week, what to talk about this week, my mind went back to actually an older message, one that I'd done several years back here at Icon. And as I read that message and as I went back to it, I thought it was so appropriate that I just had to go back and kind of work through that again, make it appropriate to where we are today. But really share this again. So this really is a message from a few years back, but I believe it speaks to us to where we are today. And really it begins around a question. It begins around an idea. And this question is, what do you do when you feel like God doesn't show up like you thought he would? You know what I mean? Like you think God would show up in this certain way, and he doesn't. Or maybe put a little bit more poignantly, what do you do when God doesn't show up like you think he should? Not just like how you expected him to, like, oh, I thought God would do this and I'm a little surprised. But no, God, you should do this. God, if you're good, God, if you're loving, God, if you care, you're going to show up like this. What do you do when he doesn't show up? You see, maybe you've thought some of these things in these past few weeks. God, if you're real, you'll find a way that I don't lose my job. And you lose your job. God, you should show up in this way and heal this person, and he doesn't. What do you do with a God like that? And I think collectively as a nation, as we mourn and grieve together, those of us that come from religious backgrounds find ourselves asking some of these questions. We're being forced to ask some difficult questions. And if you've come up from maybe a religious background, a religious tradition, we're often, we go to stories at times like this that build our faith. Stories like maybe Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You see, if you're familiar with this story, these are three Hebrew young men that are taken into captivity, into Babylon, and they're forced to bow down to another god. And they refuse to. And they're told, listen, if you don't bow down, we're going to throw you into this furnace. We're going to burn you alive. And I love the faith and the guts and the moxie of these three men, because here's how they respond. It says in Daniel 3, verses 17 through 18, if we are thrown into the fire, the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've shown up. And you see, they're thrown into this fiery furnace with that kind of boldness, that courage, that faith. They're thrown into the furnace. And the story tells us that the king is so furious, he heats the fire up. The person throwing them in is burned. They throw them in. The king leans in and he can look into the furnace and he sees them not being consumed by the flames. And as he looks in, he sees a fourth figure in the flames. This is called a Christophany, this appearance of Christ in the Old Testament. It is an angel of the Lord protecting them. It's Christ himself keeping them safe. They come out of the fire and everyone's amazed. You see, it's oftentimes in times like this that we go to stories like that. And we hold on to hope and we say, see, there's a chance we won't be burned by this fire yet. But the reality is that sometimes we're thrown into the fire of our lives and we do get burned. And the person doesn't get healed. And we lose our job. We lose that relationship. She leaves or he leaves. That person hurts us. That person won't apologize. That relationship isn't mended. What do you do then? What do you do when God doesn't show up? You see, it's times like this that hope begins to slip through our fingers. I was talking to a close friend of mine, and this couple, they're really become like family to Kelly and I, and they were telling us this tragic story of something that they went through in their life. And one of them said it was in this moment that hope was the very last thing that they lost. You see, you can hold on to hope for a really long time when things look really bad, but there's a moment where even hope disappears. And that's what we want to talk about today. What do you do then? In these moments where it feels like God should show up in a certain way and He just doesn't. Because I think there's a lot of us that are experiencing that right now, aren't we? And what I want to entitle today, if I could title today's message, is something that you could bear with me, might sound a little sacrilegious, but just give me a moment. And I'm calling today's talk, When God is Wrong. Because come on, if you've been a follower of God long enough, there's probably been moments in your life where you've thought, God, you're wrong on this one, right? I mean, can we just be a little honest today? I mean, you're in your bedroom, you're in your pajamas. What do you think? We don't need to keep up any pretenses here, right? Like, we can be honest and say there are times in our life that it just feels like God's wrong. Like, God, you missed it on this one. I remember the first time when I preached this message years ago, it was shortly after the horrible, tragic shooting in Parkland. I feel like I look back on that and say, God, you were wrong on that one. Where were you that day? And there are moments in our lives that we look at and we just go, God, you feel like you're wrong here. And in moments like this, we have some things that go through our head. We tell ourselves things like, I'll never be happy again. I'll never be happy. God has left me. Or maybe we tell ourselves, there's just no point in continuing. It feels like God isn't there. Have you ever had moments where maybe in your life you had this rich, deep prayer life? You had this ability to always pray, and moments where you feel like your prayers are just bouncing off of some brass heavenly ceiling, where it feels like God is just absent. Because I know I have. And you begin to ask yourself questions like, does God know? Does God even care? Is God concerned at all with my circumstance, with my situation? Can God even hear my prayers? I know I've walked through seasons like this, and quite honestly, over these past several weeks, I'd say how many weeks, but quite frankly, I don't even know how many weeks this has been. I've felt that way. I've had moments like that. And when I feel myself going through something like this, I often go to the text, I go to the life, the teachings of Jesus, the experiences of the early church, and see if they've experienced anything like this. And I'm often encouraged to find out that I'm not alone in this. That not only is this something that happens now, this is something that's been happening for millennia. These are questions that people have been wrestling with since the beginning of time. And there's a particular person I want to focus on today that went through this very same thing. A guy by the name of John the Baptist. Now, John the Baptist was someone who was really close to Jesus. In fact, we read that he's a cousin of some sort of Jesus's. He's related to Jesus. Not only that, John is the one who actually baptizes Jesus. So, I mean, imagine you're John, right? Like, this is a pretty big deal that you get to baptize, the Savior of the world. He's the first to make the declaration that Jesus is the Messiah. And then Jesus says of John, you can read this, he says that there has been no one greater than has ever been born than John. How about putting that on your resume, right? Like, here's some accolades from my lifetime, like, oh, I baptized the Messiah, and oh, Jesus, Christ. Here's what he said about me. Here's a little reference from him. There's been none born by women greater than John, i.e. me, the Baptist. This is a big deal. Like, John is this significant person in the life of Jesus, and he experienced a moment where he felt God's absence as well. And I think we can learn something from looking at this season in his life. Now, I want to explain a few things to you because some of what I'm going to talk about has some kind of geography elements to it. And so I need to kind of show you a little something. So I'm going to go ahead and pop up on the screen here. You'll be able to see this is a map of Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria. You can see this is kind of the region in which much of the New Testament, much of the Bible kind of takes place. There at the top of the map, you see a region called Galilee. This is where Jesus did much of his ministry. There's also kind of the Jordan River there along the right side of the map. You can see that. Jesus and John the Baptist does much of his ministry along the Jordan River. And that's where Jesus is baptized, there along the Jordan River. So this is where much of the ministry of John the Baptist takes place. Now, here's the thing. John is pretty gutsy. He's got some moxie. He's not really intimidated by what people say. And he has this habit of speaking truth to power consistently. And if you don't know this, power does not like truth being spoken to it. This is just an old thing. Surely we don't experience that in our world today. Okay, so maybe we do. So anyway, John is speaking truth to power, and what's going on in that culture in that day is there are some kind of provincial kings, some rulers that are ruling kind of certain areas. And there's this one ruler ruling in this one area that decides to take as his wife his niece. Now, John thinks that's pretty messed up, and I think we would all agree that's pretty messed up. I mean, let's be honest, they don't even do that stuff in Tennessee. So anyway, no offense, Shay, a friend of mine, one of our board members from Tennessee. But listen, this is really, really messed up. And John starts speaking out against this. And people are like, John, ixnay on the Herod, right? Let's just leave this out. He's not going to like that. Well, this Herod, this ruler, leaves and goes up to Rome for a while. So one of this niece's other uncles, another leader, while that leader is gone, takes her on as his wife. Just some really messed up family stuff going on in the Herod family. And John starts calling that as wicked. It's evil. It's sin. And they don't like that. So they have John arrested and thrown into this prison way out on the backside of the empire, as far out as you can get. There's this tiny area called, the city called Mackerras. I'm showing you here on the map. Mackerras is there, the bottom right-hand corner. This is about as far east into the Roman Empire as you can get. Now, back then, there was no such thing as kind of due process. You're just thrown into prison and left there. You just rot. In fact, John the Baptist also had disciples. He has to ask his disciples to bring him food and water. They have to do this to keep him alive. They don't even feed the prisoners there. If you don't have people caring for you while you're in prison, you just die. And John the Baptist is rotting in prison. So imagine, Jesus' relative, Jesus, the Messiah, right? God incarnate, right? Fully God, fully man, finds out that John is in prison. We read about this in Matthew 4, verse 12. It says, when Jesus heard that John had been put into prison. Now, just pause this for a moment. Can you imagine? This is one of Jesus' relatives, one of his friends, the guy who baptized him, the guy who declared that he's the Messiah. We know how Jesus thinks about John, that he's one of the greatest. And John's in prison for preaching? I mean, what would you expect Jesus to do? If it's me, what I'm expecting Jesus to do is like, Jesus is up here in Nazareth. I'm going to show you a little screen. He's up there in Nazareth, right? And then John, you can see John in Mackerras. Now, what would you expect Jesus to do, right? If you're me, I expect Jesus to go full-on Rambo and like book it down to Mackerras, at least flip over some tables. I mean, like I'm talking just tear things up and set John free. At very least, be like, hey God, can we get some angels on this real quick? And maybe Jesus can't leave and he's like, can I get some angels down there and setting John free? That's what we would all expect. But instead, this is what we read. When Jesus heard that John had been put into prison, he withdrew to Galilee, leaving Nazareth. He went and lived in Capernaum. Jesus, when he hears that John is in prison, he goes to Capernaum. And you might be wondering where Capernaum is, so I'm going to show on the map. This is again Nazareth and Mackerras, and Jesus goes up to Capernaum. And Capernaum is like this port city on the Sea of Galilee. It's this sea city, this beach city. If you've ever been there, if you've ever seen pictures of it, there's like palm trees. It's gorgeous. Jesus went the wrong way, right? I mean, John's down here in this desert prison in Mackerras, and if you saw pictures of this prison in Mackerras, it's nothing but desert as far as the eye can see. And Jesus is in the seaside city sipping Mai Tais, right? I mean, if you're John, you're like, what is happening? Right? And Jesus, he just goes the other way. He hears, literally, they put it side by side in that verse. When Jesus hears John is in prison, he leaves Nazareth and he goes to Capernaum. And history tells us that John is left in prison for a year to a year and a half. And at some point, while he's in prison, he begins to ask if Jesus is really who he claims to be. In fact, he sends his disciples. He says, listen, I need you to go talk to Jesus because I know he knows I'm in here. And I know we have this kind of relationship that we do. So I need to know some things about this Jesus. And he sends his disciples and they ask Jesus, are you the one that is to come? Are you really the Messiah? They ask, are you the chosen one of Israel? John is beginning to doubt if Jesus is who he claims to be. Is he really the Messiah? Is he really the one who I said he was? Because surely if he was, I wouldn't be here in this prison rotting away. And this is how Jesus responds. In Matthew 11, verses 4 through 5, Jesus replied, go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight. The lame walk. Those who have leprosy are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. And I wonder if John's disciples, as they listen, are going, and? Right? Like Jesus, that's good. You're doing all these things for all these other people, but what about John? I mean, elsewhere where it claims that Jesus claims, I've come to preach the good news, to do all these things. And one part of it he says, to set the captives free, kind of figuratively speaking. And they're like, we're just going to leave that part out when we report back to John. I mean, Jesus essentially says, John wants to know who I am. You go tell him all the things I'm doing for everyone but John. Man, I can't imagine what had to go through John's head as he heard those words. As he knew the promises, the things that the Messiah would do, as he heard those things that Jesus is doing, he's realizing, okay, he is the Messiah. If all these things are happening, these are the prophecies of the coming one. So surely he is the one who he claims to be. And yet, I'm still here in prison. So you might be thinking right now, Dan, thank you? Like, really? Like, this is the great news you have to give us? Is that sometimes When we're in prison, Jesus goes to Capernaum? When I'm in Mackerras and I want Jesus to come rescue me, sometimes he goes the other way and other things are done for other people, but not me? And sometimes, yeah, that is what happens. And quite honestly, I don't know why. I don't come to you with a whole lot of answers. But I come to you with some things that I know. Because there's some things that we know about Jesus and John. And if that was true for them, it's true for us. And here's what we can cling to in moments like this. That God, when he seems distant, that God, when he seems absent, that God, when he seems like he's wrong, God still loves you. That somehow, I don't know how it works, God knows your name and he knows your situation. And again, I don't have all the answers, but I know that God still wants to be active in your life. I don't have all the other answers. There's not a whole lot else I can add, but he sees you. And I want to challenge you. Do not equate God's silence for God's apathy. Do not equate God's silence for God's anger or God's indifference, his absence. God cares. And I know it might seem like he's silent right now. I get it. And I know how hard it is, but do not equate that with his ambivalence towards your situation. Because he knows you, God sees you, he loves you. In fact, shortly after this, Jesus made this statement that I think is especially true for John. It's very appropriate. In verse 6, he said, "Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." Jesus is saying there will be times that it feels like God is so absent that it causes people to stumble. And blessed is he, blessed is she, who does not stumble because of God's silence. And some truth I want you to know in the midst of this situation is you will be happy again. You will. There is God in the midst of this, even when it feels like he's absent. God is in the midst of this. And that there is a point in continuing. There is a reason to keep moving forward. You see, I heard this story. It was in this book that I read. It was a story about a family living in the prairie. And they were living, this is, 100 years ago or so, and they're living and they have this farm and they have these wheat fields. And one day there's a fire in their wheat field. And it burns up so much of their wheat field. And their life is dependent upon this wheat. And they eventually put out this fire in one of their wheat fields, and they're wondering, we're not going to make it. When we get to this winter, we're not going to have enough to survive. And they're wondering how they're going to make it through and how they're going to make it. They are just absolutely devastated, asking, I'm sure, all the questions we find ourselves asking now. And then it was about a month later that a wildfire is just ripping across the countryside. And it's moving so fast, the winds have whipped it up. The fire's moving so fast that they're not going to be able to make it out. They see the fire, they feel the heat beating down on them, and they have nowhere to run, nowhere to go. So they do the only thing they can do, and they run to that burnt patch of ground. And as they fall face down into the ash and the dirt that represented so much loss just a month ago, the fire rages around them. And the very place that was once a place of destruction and devastation ended up being a space of deliverance. And I don't know how this works. And I don't know why it works the way it does. But I've seen so many times the thing that we think is going to kill us, the thing that we think is going to destroy us, to leave us with nothing, ends up being a place that so much growth and life can come out of. And no, this is not me just saying, hey, cheer up, you're going to be okay, everything's fine. No, it's bad. I get it. I understand. And yet, somehow, I believe in the midst of this devastation, life will come from it. And I don't know how it works. And I don't know why it happens. But that's what I'm clinging to in this season. And if you want to know the kind of Jesus we have, the kind of God we have in this moment, I don't want you to be confused with what many churches and pastors and religious establishments have said, with the things that I've heard where God's just saying, hey, be happy, cheer up, everything's okay. As long as you have faith, everything's going to be okay. As long as you don't lose hope, God will protect you. That's not what I'm saying here. And I don't believe that that's what Jesus would say to us in this moment. In fact, the kind of God that we have is the kind that will mourn with us. There's this story that happens in the life of Jesus that contains one of the shortest yet most powerful verses ever written. There's a story about some loved ones of Jesus's losing someone important to them. And I want to read this. This is from John 11, verses 33 through 35. It says, when Jesus saw her weeping, this is the family of this lost loved one, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. He said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And then, the shortest verse in the whole Bible, Jesus wept. The God we have is a God that will weep when we weep. A God that will celebrate and rejoice when we celebrate. But a God that knows our human experience, that has mourned the loss of loved ones here. And I don't know how this works, and I don't know why it works the way that it does, but I want you to know that God is here with us. This, many times, that alone is just a statement of faith. And what I don't want you to do in this season is to compare yourself and how you're coping and dealing with this with someone else. If you're reading what other people are saying and saying things like, anyone who doesn't get through this without a new hobby or learning 5 new languages has just wasted their time, listen, those people can shut up, right? Like all these people saying like, you just pull yourself up, be a mom boss, you know, be a boss and accomplish all these things and all that, like, whatever. Don't judge yourself based on that. You do whatever you need to do to put one foot in front of the other. And keep telling yourself, I will be happy again. God is in the midst of this. And there is a point in continuing. Even when it feels like God got this one wrong. Which every day when you hear about the 1,000 or more deaths in our country alone, you find yourself wondering, God, I feel like you got this one wrong. Where are you? We can know that other people have lived through this too. And they made it on the other side. And somehow, we as followers of Jesus will cling to this hope, believing that some kind of life will come out of this devastation. And if all you can do is just make it through another day, that's okay. And if you're having all of these doubts, these questions, these fears, you're normal. It doesn't mean you're a bad Christian. It doesn't mean you're a bad human. It's normal. I experience those same questions too. And we want Icon to be a safe place where you can be honest with yourself. You can be true to yourself and talk about all of these things. So Icon Church, know that we love you. We hear you. We're believing with you. We want to hear about the difficult, trying times, and we want to hear about the exciting things that you're celebrating as well. So stay in touch with us. We love you. God bless you. And we hope to see you next week.